Welcome everyone. Some of okay. Yeah, people are joining now. Christian, we're having some early birds, even 1 minute in advance. So thank you so much for the punctuality. Really appreciate this. It's already 12 o'clock East. Welcome everyone. Very excited to see you joining. We're gonna leave a few seconds, maybe 1 minute, so everyone has a little bit of buffer to be joining this very exciting session. Maybe as you join, can you drop in the chat where are you joining from today? Christian and I, New York. Would be great to know where the audience is located today. We've always had a very international audience, and we take pride of that. Okay, Tennessee, nice. Good. Dallas, great. Indiana, Portugal, South Africa. Well, this is shaping up. Tampa, very cool. Northern Ireland. Christian, you're going to Dallas today, you mentioned.
Yes, going there for a conference.
Nice. Good. Well, sorry.
Moderating a panel there, which I'm really looking forward to.
Good. Well, thank you for sharing those locations, and we are very excited. Welcome to our second masterclass series with Christian Wattig. You remember our sessions during Q1, we had 3 of them, one every month, had more than 1,200 finance leaders and operators participating. It was a massive success, and given your exceptional feedback and questions and engagement during the sessions, after the sessions, these have led to us proposing to conduct a second masterclass series with Christian. We are very proud and very privileged to be doing this with him. You might remember towards the end of the last masterclass, we asked you to participate in choosing our next topic. Of course, this is meant to be relevant for you. And then over the next 3 months, we will be focusing by popular demand on how to increase your decision quality. Today, most finance leaders are treating operational velocity, operational speed as a new KPI. And of course, that means driving faster decisions with high confidence. This is going to be the topic, the umbrella that is going to connect us during the next 3 masterclass series. Today, I'm your host, Julio Martinez, co-founder and CEO of Abacum, the leading FP&A software. It's my pleasure to welcome you all, and what I can promise today is a very engaging session with Christian, as always. If this is your first time joining, don't worry. You will be able to access the recording of the session after it takes place. We always publish it, so it will be ready, accessible for all of you. And this is a 45-1-hour panel, 45-minute, 1-hour panel, where we will be covering data and analysis fundamentals, followed by an audience Q&A session. During the session, please submit your questions in the chat, and we'll address them at the end, or maybe sometimes we squeeze a few in during Christian's explanations. I cannot be more excited. Christian doesn't need any introduction still. I will make sure I cover it. Christian Wattig is an FP&A expert with over a decade of leadership experience at multinational companies and fast-growing tech startups. Today, Christian directs the FP&A certificate program at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania and shares his insights through his own training programs as the founder of FP&A Prep and on LinkedIn as well. Over 30,000 finance professionals and business leaders subscribe to his weekly newsletter, FP&A Tuesday, and you can discover more about his work at fpnaprep.com. Christian, I'm super excited to be kicking off with you this first masterclass in our second wave.
I'm excited as well. Thanks so much for having me again, Julio.
Awesome. Let's do this. Hey, let's kick off with some some pool questions. We want to check temperature here in the audience. And now there you go. You have them here. I'll give you a few seconds. We want to see the answers. Cool. If you can vote, we will start wrapping it up and check the answers. I think that's also given us some clues as to how to guide the conversation going forward. By the way, remember, drop at any time your questions in the chat. We will make sure we address them. Don't let Christian leave without covering your questions. This is a great opportunity to get them answered and get more proficient on improving decision quality. Cool. Awesome. Let's start. There you go. Okay. I think this is very telling, right, Christian? Somewhat confident.
Yes. Yes, that's what I expected, honestly. That's probably where most people are. What is a bit surprising that only 3% said they have consistent KPI definitions. I actually expected this number to be higher. So that's interesting. And that means that people will definitely get some takeaways here.
Yeah, there you go. This will make your session very relevant to everyone. And hey, this is the classic battle around the definitions of some of these KPIs. Cool. Well, without further delay, let's kick off formally. And let me go with the first question. Let's start with the basics about data in finance to make sure that we are all on the same page. How do companies usually organize their financial information?
Yeah, so I'm going to say up front that this is now a bit more technical compared to, if you watched previous webinars where I was speaking. But it's really important that we understand these technical fundamentals because they enable you to do better analysis. If you know how your company's data is organized, it just opens a lot of doors for modeling and analysis that you didn't have before. So let me share my screen and walk you through. So there are several ways that companies decide to slice and dice and organize their data. The most fundamental is the account. So that's the lowest level of the data hierarchy. That's where you have, for example, your direct marketing expense could have an account number. So this is your lowest level of organization. And then you have cost centers or profit centers. Now, cost centers are those buckets, if you will, for departments that don't directly generate revenue, while profit centers are for departments that do generate revenue. And the purpose is to track costs and expenses directly related to revenue generation versus not directly related to revenue generation. For example, sales is a profit center. Now, you may sometimes read on social media people saying, oh, finance can be a profit center if you do A, B, and C. You could use this to make an argument, but from a data organization point of view, that doesn't make much sense because finance doesn't directly sell anything or doesn't directly there's no part of the revenue that's easily directly attributable to finance. Because what's important to keep in mind here is that with all of these definitions, they're set up somewhere in the system, and then you need to reliably track revenues against that. If there's a big debate about who is contributing what and who's driving which revenue every month, you might as well not track it. So finance sits under the cost center from a pure data point of view. That's not to say that finance can't have a big impact on revenue, but from a data point of view, it sits as a cost center. Then there's a department hierarchy level. So some companies say, I don't bother with what's cost center, what's profit center. I just put my different departments into my financial systems and match them with accounts. So for example, you have your marketing department, your sales department, and now we can already see a bit of a matrix emerging because you have if you imagine this like a spreadsheet, the accounts could be the rows, then the columns could be your cost centers, profit centers, or departments. Then some companies also decide to track their data using business units. That's especially useful if they are very diversified, if they offer a lot of products and services and they want to group them and analyze profitability of a specific group of services. For example, automotive might be an example here, or beauty or hardware. Then there are legal entities. They are especially relevant if your company does a lot of M&A, if it acquires other companies. Oftentimes they keep their legal entity structure, which can make the life of the finance team sometimes a bit difficult because you have to deal with different data sets that maybe aren't connected that well yet. And often also companies need to create a new legal entity when they're opening an office in a different country. Often that's required for legal reasons. Some companies also organize themselves by geographic location, by country, for example, or by product and service. Now, this can be especially important for determining if you have multiple products, where should the company invest their money? What does the ROI of those investments look like? If you can break out a product or a service, in reality, that often means that you have to allocate your overhead costs, which can sometimes be subjective, but it can still be worth it to do that. Some companies also decide to track by customer, especially if you have a large number of a small number of very large customers, excuse me. For example, a consumer goods company selling to retail may have Walmart, Target, and Amazon as their customers. Then there's the channel dimension. So that's where you can highlight costs and revenues associated to a channel like online or retail or wholesale. And then lastly, there's also the project dimension where, especially in certain industries like construction, software development, engineering, you have these huge projects that take a long time, that have dedicated project teams. And there you want to make sure you have it separated out in your financial systems so you can easily keep track of how that's going financially. Now, what's interesting about this is, and also where finance and FP&A play a big role, is almost everything that I'm showing here on the slide is optional, is a choice. In fact, there are only 2 items here that are mandatory. Do you know which those are? Which those 2 items are that are mandatory for every company? It's the account and it's the legal entity. The account hierarchy you need to have because there are accounting rules and you need to track your expenses and revenues. And the legal entity is required for tax purposes. Yep, thank you. Thank you, Eric and Jacob. Everything else is a choice. And so it's a strategic decision, actually. It sounds like it's very basic, but it's a big strategic decision to decide, okay, we are implementing a business unit tracking. Because ideally then, that also then goes with a restructuring of the company. If you're tracking by business unit, probably you want to put someone in charge of that business unit, right? Someone who is responsible for all of the hardware products, for example. And that can have big strategic implications. Now, there are associated with this, there are 2 terms, two constructs that you need to know. The first one is the chart of accounts. Super, super important. So the chart of accounts is a database that should have everything that you see on the screen here written out. So all the account hierarchy, the cost centers, the profit centers, the departments. So if you work in finance and you want to do a financial analysis, you want to understand ROI for something, for example, that's usually where I recommend the first step should be is take a look at the chart of account and see what is your company already doing with what I have on the screen here. You might find that it's actually really easy to do your product profitability analysis because we're already tracking by product, or you may find that it's not there and you need to implement it first. So chart of accounts. And the other important principle here is that of the unique identifier. So a new unique identifier is a name or a number that clearly identifies the object of your analysis. So why is it important? So let's say, for example, that you're getting data from different systems. Maybe you have your ERP system and you also have your customer relationship management system. And you want to track the customer journey from them being a lead to the purchase of your product and the associated revenue. In order to do that, you need to connect your CRM tool with your financial revenue and with your ERP system, essentially. And the only way to do that is you have a certain number associated with that customer, that lead that you want to track, and with the associated revenue of that customer, with that specific account, a specific account number for that. If you have that clearly set up, you have these unique identifiers, then it's fairly easy with the right tool to build a database where you can make all these connections and you can create all this analysis from your data. So chart of accounts, unique identifier, super important.
Christian, thank you so much for sharing. Super thorough. Those items are, as well as we call sometimes in FP&A, potentially dimensions where you can tag your data across them and then slice and dice. And as Christian was mentioning, it's absolutely critical, as probably you will attach to those dimensions, performance and accountability conversations and org structure. Thank you so much for covering this. Loved it. Let's move on to the second question. We often hear that finance needs to clean data for their models and reports. But what does that actually mean? And what are the best practices to get there efficiently?
Yeah, so let's look at the definition of clean data first, because there's more than goes into it than maybe what you think from the outset. So first of all, of course, numbers need to be accurate, the data needs to be accurate, but that means it's free from error. So for example, if you have some data that has to be entered manually by hand, for example, headcount data, often, you have to enter some of it at least by hand, or maybe prospect information, lead information in your CRM. Sometimes it also gets added by hand. You need to make sure that there's a process in place to review this. Then your data also needs to be consistent across different data sets and across time. It's very important because often you want to compare, okay, how did a metric change over the course of years? And you can only do that if you have tracked and received the data in the same way across this time frame. Then there's completeness, so that all the necessary data points are present and available. It sounds trivial, but it can be tricky because when we run an analysis or we get inputs for a financial model in FP&A, often we use aggregate data. So you use the sum of all transactions of a certain account or a cost center or a hierarchy level. And you don't, at least I rarely, look at the transactional level just to see if everything is complete. You definitely should have checks in place to see, okay, am I maybe missing some data points? If you know that there could be a risk, if you're getting the data from your ERP system that's connected to your bank account, etc., probably don't have to check because it's all electronic in a sense. But if you know, for example, that you recently changed your revenue recognition system, for example, then maybe you want to look, is there maybe something that could have gone lost in that transition? Maybe even some historical data that didn't get carried over, etc. Your data needs to be uniform. So that can be, for example, using consistent data formats like dates, year, month, day. That can sometimes result in databases not picking up the value correctly. And of course, they need to be relevant. So this can be a bit judgmental, but when you're running an analysis, building a financial model, you should only bring in data that influences the decision you're analyzing. So if you made investments in the past that weren't meant to drive the outcome you're analyzing, then you probably shouldn't include them, for example. That's part of data cleanliness as well. And then lastly, of course, the data should be up to date and reflect the most current information, right? It's pretty clear. Now, the thing is, how do you get there, right? Or put differently, let's say you're running a financial analysis, you're pulling the data, and then you take this, you go through these 6 categories, and you find that your data isn't clean. You find that there's stuff missing, that there's some inconsistency that's maybe not completely uniform. What do you do, right? Of course, and I definitely did this in the past as well. If the time is short, you may just go in and see if you can fix it, right? If you can download the additional data, if you go into Excel and replace some of the data labels and just try to fix it so you can move on with your analysis. That's fine if you're really close to a big deadline maybe, but it's definitely not sustainable. Ideally, you shouldn't have to do this. Now, what you do instead depends a bit on if you work in a small or in a large company. At a large company, you should go to your IT business partner, point out the issue, and say, hey, can you maybe walk me through your processes that you have in place for data governance and how you're currently checking that this data is accurate. And then maybe you find some gaps in that review process, and you can make recommendations how they can address those issues, or you can ask them to come up with recommendations on how to address those issues. That's what you should do at a larger company. If you work in a small company, you might not have an IT department, right? You might not have someone to walk to. But even there, I would recommend it does take more time, it is more cumbersome, but see if you can fix it at the source. See if you can trace the issue back all the way to the original source of the data, because maybe it's a simple setting in your ERP system that needs to be checked. Or the third option, which you can do no matter which company size you're at, is get a tool that essentially takes care of that. So often when I dealt with companies who had issues with data quality, it was because they didn't have consistent unique identifiers that connect their data properly. That was often an issue that led to data inconsistencies, data issues. And then the solve for that is to implement a tool like Abacom or others that connects the data sources in the cloud, where you go in once and you make sure that everything is set up properly, that all the identifiers are there, that everything ties. And then when it's set up once, the system ensures, that it stays that way, and that you get alerted if there's all of a sudden an inaccuracy. And so that's another way to address this.
Christian, thank you so much. Very thorough. I really appreciate this deep understanding as to what cleaning data means and some of the best practices related to it. I think I wanted to pick one question, maybe coming from Michael. Can you speak just a bit about the geographic location? So, for instance, the GAAP versus non-GAAP requirement. Thank you.
Sorry, regarding
the geographic location requirement and potentially doing GAAP versus non-GAAP or some other adjustments.
Okay. So first of all, I'm not an accountant, okay? I actually never studied accounting. I never worked as an accountant, so I can't really speak to GAAP versus non-GAAP issues. But what I can point to is this is an area where if you're doing GAAP reporting, it's really black and white. You can't, so I mentioned that a lot of this is a choice and you can make decisions around that. That's for your internal analysis. If you're doing external reporting, GAAP reporting, maybe you're a public company and you have to report the numbers or you have to maintain it according to GAAP standards. You have to do your homework. You have to look up, okay, what are the requirements for doing this for your specific local local accounting law body, essentially. And then it can actually be very black and white and very prescriptive. Everything I'm talking about is not about accounting. It's not about external reporting. It's about internal decision making and structuring the data in a way that it's optimized for improving decision quality, for doing better financial analysis and better financial modeling. Super important. So thanks for asking the question and allowing me to clarify that.
Thank you so much. We also see that a lot in our customer base, right? So oftentimes there is two types of reporting, and one is going to be the external, which is going to be very accurate and precise in following the accounting rules and or standards, basically. But then that doesn't mean is what you need to drive better decisions within the company. Oftentimes it is not the case, right? And you prefer to drive a lot of adjustments. And this is what we see most of our customers actually do. So this is actually a great question. And Christian, I was discovering today how to drive and how to improve decision quality, right? So financial information together with operational KPIs so that we in finance allow stakeholders to drive better decisions. Cool. Awesome. Let's go for the third. Yeah, thank you, Michael. Thank you for your question on the chat. Let's go to the third one. Right? Once the data is clean, right? And this is easier said than done, but once the data is clean, the next step is to make sure that everyone is on the same page when it comes to how KPIs and other metrics are defined. This is back to that 3%. This sounds easier again than it often is. There are some debates, and it is the classic. You go into a meeting and you start the first half an hour trying to redefine metrics, and there is conflicts of data, right? That's a situation where probably all of us are sadly very familiar with. Christian, we need your advice here. How do we solve for this?
Yeah, I actually wanted to start by sharing a story. And after, I saw the poll, I think a lot of people will find themselves maybe in the story as well. And I'm actually happy to hear that I'm not alone with this issue. So a few years ago, I led an FP&A team at Squarespace, a company that sells software that helps businesses build their websites. And one of my team's priorities was to improve forecast accuracy by analyzing the funnel. In our case, Squarespace being a business to consumer, B2C company, the funnel looked like this. People would find the company website, and then they would enroll in a free trial where they can try the product for free for 2 weeks. And then at some point, they would hopefully convert to a paying customer. And my team, we analyzed the funnel because we wanted to see, okay, are there any changes to trend that then would impact our forecast? So for example, if fewer people convert from website visitor to trial, maybe there's an issue that our copy isn't working that well anymore, or maybe we're not attracting the right leads with our marketing. And if fewer people convert from free trial to the product purchase, then maybe the product isn't easy to use enough, or there are some features that aren't as well received. And so one day I'm sitting in a large meeting room with most of the senior leaders present, and I was presenting the results of our analysis. My team and I, we had worked on this for a long time. It was a big moment for me because my team and I had worked on this analysis for a long time. and I didn't often get the opportunity to present in front of the entire leadership group. So yeah, it was a big deal. The head of marketing was there, the head of product and engineering, and my manager, the VP of finance. And so just as I'm making a point about the conversion rate of website visitors to free trials, then that it had dropped in recent months, the head of product interrupts me. He says, your numbers for website visitors aren't right. I'm seeing different numbers. In fact, looking at our analysis, since there actually are much fewer website visitors, conversion rates improved recently. For a moment, I was shocked and I didn't know what to respond. We double checked and triple checked the numbers before the meeting to make sure we didn't accidentally pull in the wrong data. I even checked it myself right before the meeting again. And so there was no way we accidentally used the wrong figures. And then, of course, the rest of the meeting was messy. No one knew what the right numbers were, and we had to stop the conversation there, and the meeting moved on to different topics. And after the meeting, of course, I immediately dove into the data. I asked the head of product to send me his data set. And it took me a while, but in the end, I figured out that it's not the data itself, but the definition of a website visitor was different. So, when it comes to tracking traffic to a website, a lot of people stay only 2-3 seconds and then they leave, especially if they visit the website for the first time. Do you count this as a lead? When they just visit very briefly, at which point do you start counting that as a lead? So the product team had a more strict definition of that, and we in finance had a wider definition because we thought, well, even if they just stay for 1 second, we might have paid for that person to come to the website. So there, in the end, we had a lot of discussions around what is the right way to track this. We got there eventually, but ideally you want to avoid this because discussions around especially all the preparation that went into the meeting and then the presentation of the meeting, that was essentially wasted time. So how could this have been prevented in the first place? Well, you need to have a single source of data and data definition. A single source of truth is what it's called. And what that means is you have a single repository where everyone in the company has access and where all the metrics and all the definitions of those metrics and how they are being calculated are stored. And then also, as important as having that in the first place, you must have someone or several someones who are responsible for keeping that up to date. Because if you do that once, it has to be kept alive, it has to be updated, and there has to be someone whose job that is. If there's nobody whose job that is, it's not going to work. So you could do this by having a large spreadsheet where you write down all your metrics and the formula and how they're calculated. It's the old way of doing things, but that can get very difficult to update, very messy. So this is also where tools like Abacom come in that connect the different systems and databases and then calculate those metrics, and everyone has access to that and they can see how it's being calculated, and then you have that single source of truth. So very important.
Christian, thank you for sharing this great story. I think we relate closely to it. Lori is also sharing that, expressing the frustration of having gone back and forth and as, their criteria and information. So definitely that common definition is very helpful. Hey, let's move on to finance leaders. Obviously the fourth question. So finance leaders need to ensure they look at the business holistically. You spoke about the completeness of data to having a broader view of the business. How can you make sure that you aren't missing any important metrics that are important for the company?
Yeah. So the thing is, it's important to take a step back and think about, okay, what should I be looking at as a finance manager? What are all the metrics that I should keep an eye on, or that maybe not I, but the team broadly needs to keep an eye on? And it can be overwhelming because there are so many metrics, P&L KPIs, balance sheet KPIs that you can track. But actually, I find it becomes a little bit easier to manage if you take a step back and you realize that there are really only 5 categories of financial ratios. And they are liquidity ratios, leverage ratios, efficiency ratios, profitability ratios, and market value ratios. So let's take a look at those. Let's take a closer look. So liquidity ratios, those evaluate your ability to meet short-term financial obligations, such as repaying your debts, paying salaries. It's all about assessing your financial health, stability, solvency. And there are several ratios for all of these. I'm showing only one as an example, but I would definitely encourage you to Google this and to research this more, which of these ratios most apply to your company. But there's, for example, the current ratio. So current assets and liabilities are those assets and liabilities that can reasonably be turned into cash relatively quickly. So things like cash, accounts receivable, inventory, accounts payable, short-term debt. That's what you're analyzing with your current ratio. Then there are leverage ratios. So they're all about evaluating your debt level and your ability to meet long-term financial obligations. And we're looking at, of course, the debt ratio there. So that's the share of the proportion of the total company's assets that are financed by debt. And there are a few other metrics as well. When we talk about efficiency ratio, it's about determining assets, resource utilization, how efficient your company is at conducting their operations. And a very popular metric for companies that have physical products is the inventory turnover ratio. That's basically, so you divide your cost of goods sold divided by your average inventory. And that's where you look at how frequently does your inventory get sold? How frequently does it turn? And when you all of a sudden that starts to slow down, you probably, for example, need to be careful that you don't have too much inventory in your warehouses, for example. And it could also be a point to issues in your sales process. That it's not that there's a demand issue; it could be internal issues as well. Then there are, of course, profitability ratios. I don't need to say much of those. You're all familiar with them. It's the ability to generate profits relative to revenue. So your net profit margin, gross profit margin, operating income margin, etc. And then the last one is market value ratios. They are important for the external perspective. And that matters also internally because the company has to deal with investors, whether you're private or public, and you want to understand how are they looking at us? How do they perceive our financial attractiveness as an investment target? And so you can look at dividend yield, for example, and how that changes over time, dividends per share divided by stock price. So that's an overview of the financial ratios. Again, you really need to do your own research because behind each of those 5 categories, there are 10, 15 metrics that you might want to track. But the idea here is that these 5 categories give you a starting point to make sure that you're really comprehensive in tracking those metrics.
Christian, thank you so much. And we are getting amazing questions in the chat. So we'll make sure we address them. I'm getting very excited about what's coming. Hang in there. We'll be covering them. Now, let's say, okay, we get that finance teams need to look at a lot of metrics to spot issues early, right? And those leading indicators and the lagging indicators. But probably they shouldn't highlight all of them, right? All of the metrics in the reports to senior leaders, right? So how should leaders, finance teams decide which metrics to highlight?
Yeah, and actually, this is the exact question that also Esha and Patricia are asking in the chat. So, we have all these metrics, but obviously you can't just throw them at your leaders every time. It's overwhelming and it's not really helpful. You need to identify the metrics that matter. And the way I recommend you go about this is start with the strategy and then work backwards. Why? Well, because the strategy, that's what the leadership team decided the company should be going after. That's the direction everybody is running in. That's what we're trying to achieve. So your responsibility as the finance leader is to tell leaders whether the strategy is working or not. Okay, that's your ultimate goal and really what people care most about. Because if you're saying that the strategy is working, leaders can rest assured they know we probably hit our targets for the year. But if your metrics say that the strategy isn't working, then they need to get up and do something, right? Point their teams in different directions, address the issue. So this is really how you can narrow this down. But I want to be more specific. So you start with the strategy. You understand the strategies and what people are trying to achieve. Then you need to define what success looks like and how success is being measured. Sometimes that's trivial. It's about if the strategy is to increase the effectiveness of your sales team, for example. You can easily measure how much each sales rep is contributing in terms of revenue. But it could be more difficult if, for example, the strategy is to say, we've done too much short-term marketing. We need to do more longer-term marketing. We need to invest more in our brand awareness. Maybe we need to do a Super Bowl ad, that's really long-term. How do you measure that, right? So that's what you need to define at this step. What does success look like? And then you drill into that success metric and you say, what are the drivers? What needs to be true? Who needs to deliver what to achieve the objective? And then you start with brainstorming your ideal metrics. So what I mean with that is make a list of what all the metrics are that you could be tracking. But what's important here is don't yet think about availability and data availability and your ability to track it. Because from a best practice point of view, you want to have a brainstorming phase and then separately think about feasibility, because you don't want to eliminate a metric too soon, right? You want to see maybe something that seems like you can't track right now actually is trackable if you just put a bit more thought into it. And then as a next step, you evaluate the availability. How easy is it to get the data? What would have to be done in order to start tracking these things? And as a last step, you align on what are you moving forward with, what's feasible. So I actually want to, because this is a bit abstract, I want to give a concrete example with a made-up company called Pear. So first step is understand the strategy. Well, investors are impatient about seeing profitability. Growth was accelerating recently, but there were increasing marketing expenses. And as a result, Pear wants to find a way to increase sales without further increasing customer acquisition cost. Then it's all about defining what success looks like. Well, what we want is we want to increase sales, but at the same time, we want customer acquisition cost to stay below 5%. Okay, success is defined. The next step is identify the drivers. Well, our average contract value has to go up, website conversion rate has to increase, customer retention, marketing has to reach more people, customer service, satisfaction scores needs to be good. Okay, so we understand the drivers. Then you can turn this into your ideal metrics. And again, you do this not yet evaluating whether you can actually track these or not. And then as a next step, you look for each metric, what's available. So for example, I'm not going through the entire list here, but for average order value, we can easily obtain that. That's not a problem. But for customer satisfaction score at the bottom of this list here, implementation is needed so we can actually start tracking this. So that's the availability stage. And then lastly, you determine feasibility. So that's where you actually sit down with the different departments and you say, okay, AOV and website, no problem. We track this. Customer retention rate, actually, there's some integration and we don't yet know how complex this is. So we can run a test and then decide. But when it comes to customer satisfaction score, the IT and design teams who would have to contribute to that just don't have the time immediately to start working on that. So this gets postponed. So that's how you decide which metric to track.
Christian, thank you so much. Fantastic explanation. We are piling up some questions here. We're going to go for that are very relevant to this. So we're going to go for the last question that we prepared for you, and we'll open up the Q&A. So now, once everyone is on the same page on which metrics should get tracked as following this process, the finance team has to analyze variances between actuals and projections, of course. What are the best practices for variance analysis?
Yeah, so I will introduce the topic of variance analysis here, and then in our next webinar next month, we'll go more into the how and the specific techniques to get there. But the most important piece conceptually when it comes about to variance analysis is that it needs to be you need to consider the what, the why, and the so what. So to give a concrete example, you're comparing your actuals versus your forecast, and you realize that professional fees are unfavorable by 251,000. That's the what, right? So far, so easy. The why then is, well, we determined that the increase in professional fees is primarily driven by our auditor, Deloitte. That was 267,000 unfavorable, so that's driving most of the difference. Now, many finance teams stop here. They think the job is done. We can put a check mark here, and we are good to go with our variance analysis. But if you stop here, you leave a lot of value on the table. And I would argue that variance analysis up to this point is actually not that valuable, because what's missing is a so what. So in this case, you dig deeper into the data, and then you might find, well, the cost increase isn't due to more billable hours. It's not that we are more complex and the audit was more complex, but rather due to a significant price increase. We should compare the new price to other audit firms and consider changing our auditor. So now you're actually helping leaders make better decisions. You're improving decision quality because you can point to the so what. What does this even mean, right? Is this good or bad? Is this something you need to be worried about or not, right? Because in the end, that's really the question you want to answer is, do we need to do something about this or is everything okay, right? So the what is identifying and quantifying the variance, determining the difference between the actual results and the budgeted or forecasted figures. The why is about the reasons behind it. And then the so what is interpreting the significance, looking forward at how this might impact your forecast, and making concrete recommendations about what the company should be doing, okay? So I want to give you another example because, yeah, this is just such an important point to drive home. Salaries are favorable to the forecast by 75,000. That's the what. This is mostly driven by longer time to fill vacancies, partially offset by higher 401k matching. That's the why. And then the longer time to fill vacancies is an outlier, no further impact on the forecast. So here the finance team did the deeper analysis and they checked, okay, now we have these longer time to fill vacancies. Could it be that maybe something changed in the hiring market? Is it more difficult to find the right talent now? But actually they found out it's not. It's just an outlier. And so we don't need to adjust our forecast. We don't need to worry that we won't be able to fill our future roles in time. So an important so what can also mean everything is okay. There's nothing to worry here. So notice here that I have, or in terms of best practices to do this, you want to have a consistent sign, favorable expenses and unfavorable revenues are negative. You want to include major drivers and offsets. You don't always need to reconcile 100%. This is also important because getting to the so what takes time, and you don't want to spend the majority of the time you have by explaining each and every small dollar amount. So you need to figure out what's that 80-20, right? What's the 20% of the line items that explain 80% of the variance? And for the significant variances, you should go for the so what. So this is an introduction to variance analysis and what you should focus on. And then in the next webinar, we'll go deeper into how do you actually go there.
Christian, excited already for that upcoming webinar. Will we go deeper into these topics? Let me select, we have time for a few questions. So let me select one that Edward posted some time ago already. Hey, we track certain KPIs and metrics. And we've gone through a process of even up to variance analysis. But how do you actually drive company decisions? He's sharing, hey, I report these KPIs every month and probably in certain forums, but what are the next steps to improve decision making?
Yeah. So typically, you're creating your reports, you're sending them out, you're not hearing much back, you don't really know if you're moving the needle, right? If you're really influencing decisions. When that happens, usually it means that you're not close enough to the business. And what that means is that you need to have a better understanding of what keeps people up at night. What are the pain points? What are the big decisions that they have to make right now? Because if you know that, you know which metrics to highlight, you know what you need to give them. And you can send a report and you can have a follow-up conversation and say, hey, I know you need to decide whether to sunset one of our products because we can own complexity has gone a bit high, and I've sent you a report on that, but is there anything else I can give you about this specifically that would make it easier for you to make the decision? And then you can get much closer to the actual decisions that are happening. So long story short, if you feel like your reporting isn't influencing decision making, then it's probably because you aren't aware enough or close enough to what those decisions actually are.
Thank you. Let me pick a question from Michael. How do you analyze the data in finance? Do you use data science techniques, or is a regular approach with Excel enough?
So again, you need to work backwards from the decision you're trying to make rather than starting with tools and methods. So if your decision, I'm thinking about a good example. Let's take it back to what I mentioned earlier about the company is not sure whether they should invest more in long-term advertising or short-term advertising, right? And if you want to figure out if your long-term, if the investments in your brand, in your name, that doesn't immediately drive sales, if that's actually helping you grow in the future, then you probably fall short with traditional analysis fairly quickly, because doing something like this requires correlation analysis, it requires isolating drivers, it requires removing noise, and it also might require looking at a lot of data to really get there. And in those cases, then the decision is clear. If I want to figure out whether my long-term marketing investments are working, I need to have a proper statistical approach, a statistical model. Maybe I have to have a data scientist look at that to properly do this attribution modeling and all this correlation, covariance analysis that goes into it.
Kristen, thank you so much. Let me select now one question from Max. Any tips on how to ensure finance is aligned with other departments when it comes to data definitions and expectations?
All about communicating and over communicating, right? If I bring it back to my example that I shared, where we had the product team had one definition of what a website visitor is, the finance team had a different definition. our problem was that I didn't even know that the product team was looking at this differently. I just assumed that everyone would get the same data as we are getting. And so that's the first step, right? Is talking to everyone who is looking at data in the company and or to the heads of those departments and see what are their data sources? Where are they getting their data from? What are they doing with the data once they're getting it? Are they manipulating it? Are they changing it somehow? Sometimes that requires talking to your systems experts because some of these manipulations happen somewhere in a system, somewhere in your finance tech stack, and you have to peel that back. That's the first step, and that's actually super important. What's currently there? How are people looking at things? And then once you have established that, then it all gets a lot easier because then it's just about communication. It's just about once you have identified those mismatches and definition, then it's just about getting people at a table and coming to an agreement about how you want to track this going forward.
Christian, thank you so much. I think maybe the last question Patricia and Anisha were mentioning, and there were other questions from them that I think were addressed in a previous topic you covered, but they are related to nonprofit KPIs and presenting them to the finance committee and the board. And so we have made a lot of nonprofit customers. That's a very important vertical for us. So we know of the uncertainty sometimes of revenue, given that many nonprofits depend on grants, and so we have deep expertise there. So happy to follow up separately as to how we see the best practices across our customer base, if that's helpful. I'm not sure, Chris, like this is a bit more industry specific. I'm not sure if you have anything top of mind. Wanted to be comprehensive in covering the people the audience questions.
Yeah, no, actually, I've never worked in a nonprofit, and it's not an area where I know a lot about.
Cool. Yeah, thank you so much. And cool. And maybe the last question. Let's pick one there. Pau is asking. No, I think you've covered this one. We had too many. Lucas, going back to cleaning data, our team spends a lot of time cleaning data and preparing for data manually. So any particular tips on automating or streamlining this besides what you cover, anything top of mind?
So when it comes to data cleaning, as much as you need to automate this as much as possible, right? It's always, like I mentioned, it's always you feel like, oh, I just feel really quickly fix this in Excel. I'm good with Excel. I can fix this in a few minutes. But that's not sustainable because you have to keep doing that again and again. And it's not just the time you lose, it's also that you might forget, or you're someone on your team might forget at some point. And then, your accuracy really falls apart. And so you need to figure out how to fix it at the source. And often the only way to do that is to bring in the right tool that helps you do that. There is no magic bullet, unfortunately.
Thank you so much, Christian. No shortcuts.
Sorry, actually, I had a thought about the earlier question about which metrics to track for nonprofits. So I don't know what those metrics are, but what I've found is that what can actually be very helpful in just giving you a list of possible metrics is AI, right? I feel like your ChatGPT, your Gemini, your Claude, they're fantastic brainstorming partners for something like this. You could ask a prompt and explain your situation, explain what your nonprofit does, explain what their strategies are and what the requirements are, and then ask it to recommend 10 KPIs you should track. Now, of course, you need to take that with a grain of salt. You need to, check each of them to make sure, is it really applicable? Also, is it really calculated correctly? But you can ask the AI chatbot to give you links for everything so you can look back at the sources. And what I found is, especially for something like this, where it's essentially about brainstorming, AI can be a fantastic partner for you in this to give you a starting point. So you know where to start and you know what to investigate.
Kristen, thank you very much. It's unfortunately now time to wrap up. Really appreciate this very insightful session, Chris, and really thankful also to the audience for not only joining, but giving this very high level of questions and engagement. It's been such a blast. I appreciate you joining, and I very much look forward to chatting again in our next session. That's going to be 16th of June. Pencil that down in your calendars. Looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.